I'm Carmel Summers, and you're all very welcome to the Technology Ireland ICT SkillNet webinar series, which is aptly named Lockdown Your Learnings. I hope you're all keeping well and adjusting to the new norm that we're currently finding ourselves in. So today, the aim is to lock down your learnings in leading a remote team. And as we're new to webinars, please bear with us. There may be a few gremlins in the system, but let's hope not. So before we get started, I just want to point out a few things. This session will be recorded and available for distribution afterwards, so you will be able to download it from our website, www.ictskillnet.ie. So if your connection drops or if you have to leave the session, you know that you can pick up the recording afterwards. Participants are muted on entry, so that's just really to cut down on any noise or interference. There is, however, a Q&A facility, which you will see at the end of the bottom of your screen in the center. So please feel free to ask any questions during the session using that utility. And my colleague Aideen in the background will actually facilitate this. And I will certainly try to answer as many of those questions at the end of the session. So, without further ado, please bear with me while I share my screen and take you through this session on leading a remote team. Okay, so I think a lot of us are very familiar with the concept of working from home or remote working. And we felt, given the current situation that we're in, that this was a really good webinar to kick off this series with, because I think a lot of us are faced with leading remote teams like we have never done before. So what I'm going to take you through is really that whole context about what working from home is about. We'll take a look at some of the challenges that face all of us, not just as managers or leaders, but as employees too. And then we'll take a look at some of some tips and techniques about some effective ways to lead a team remotely. We're also providing you with a number of useful links at the end of this session. So some of those are on technology, some of them are some papers that you might find useful to read, nothing too heavy duty in there. And I'll cover all of those towards the end of the session. So I guess let's get started. So those of us who are familiar with working from home, and a lot of companies have working from home policies, and they may have some employees who work from home on a full-time basis, some who work remotely or from home on a part-time basis. That can be, 2 afternoons a week, a day or two a week, typically again with a working from home policy in place, right through to those organizations who don't have a working from home policy at all, but yet would have the technology maybe to support that, but it's not part of their culture, or it doesn't maybe particularly work very well for them given their current line of business. So we'll address each of these scenarios as we go through this setting today. So one of the things that happens with a working from home policy is that organizations tend to have a set of requirements that need to be in place in order for somebody to work from home. So typically that they have a home office space or a designated zone within the home that is away from the communal areas. They generally need to have a proper desk, ergonomic office chair, maybe some tools like printers and shredders. So they're the things that working from home policies usually state in order for somebody to work from home. And it also is kind of a psychological thing for somebody who works from home, that you kind of feel that you're in a work environment, even though you are working from home, once you have a setup that kind of mirrors the setup you would have in work. Today, however, many are working from home where they may have a home office, but they're sharing the office space. There may be 2 adults in the house working from home. There may be children that are doing lessons from the same space or from the kitchen table. We may have students who are studying for exams. So I suppose the environment that we find ourselves in is very different. I think we need to be cognizant of these as we go, as we look at this topic, because certainly for me, the whole concept is, I'm so used to that working from home environment that having a space, you just assume that everybody's working from home has that same office type environment. So we need to be very aware that when we do calls with people, there may be dogs barking in the background, there may be children running around in the background, and that is just the scenario that a lot of people are finding themselves in today. So we've gone from that nice office space of, comfortable space in the home where we, have our office desk, to maybe right now being in a scenario where we're trying to read emails while managing two kids having breakfast. Or another one to remember is that a lot of our younger employees who've just maybe come out of college in the last couple of years are maybe house sharing or apartment sharing. And for them, it may be equally difficult to work from home, just given that the environment that they may have to work in, where maybe some of their housemates are also working from home, or maybe a worse scenario where some of them aren't and are watching TV, or because you can't get out very much, that you've got everybody in a very confined space while some are actually trying to work. So the challenges then that face both managers and employees are not hugely different, as I've mentioned. So I think the first thing to be aware of is that people have different personalities. People cope with things differently. So there are those of us who, maybe that we have some people in our team who are a little bit more introverted, may find the isolation of working at home actually suits them. They're out of the hustle and bustle of the work environment. They actually have space. They have time to think. They get a lot done. There are others of us who are more, let's say, social, where part of going into a physical work location is very much about the connectivity with others. So whether that's that cup of coffee in the morning, lunch in the middle of the day, or actually the whole thing of face-to-face business meetings, it's part and parcel of what they understand as part of their role, part of their work environment, part of what it means to go to work. They may find this working from home particularly challenging, especially when it is it is actually imposed at the moment. And the longer this goes on, the more that people, even who would be happy to work from home, may find it a little bit isolating. So just to be aware of that as one of the big challenges that's out there. This whole concept of home and work divide is an interesting one. I worked for 31 years with an organization where for at least 25 of those, we had a working from home policy. And certainly I worked from home, almost 2 days a week. But I've worked with people for over 20 years who never worked from home unless there was 4 foot of snow outside the front door. And for them, work took place, in the work location, in the office setting, and home was home. And, they were two mutually exclusive zones for them. And it's actually not that unusual. And I think what we see now is with the more mobile devices that have come along, and the fact that now we can actually, get our email on our personal phones, on our work mobiles, there is this kind of boundary tipping point that, suddenly, work and home have started to collide much more. Not to mention the fact that a lot of organizations are working globally, which kind of pushes our working hours further out of than what would have been the norm, I suppose, of 9 to 5. So for some, that whole thing of the physical building, separate buildings, is actually what separates work and home life. And 20 years ago, you just turned off your laptop. You weren't getting your work email on phones in the evening. Now, I think people need to be a lot more disciplined in this environment around turning off the devices and picking those hours that they're going to work. So we'll take a look at that as we move through. So working norms have also changed. And what we find with working norms is that if you're in the office, there are a set of routines that happen every day. So your weekly team meetings now need to be hosted. Everybody isn't in the office for those. Those kind of impromptu meetings at people's desks, they're gone. That whole thing of, I suppose gathering at, the gathering at the water cooler or the coffee machine, or bumping into somebody on your way to lunch and stopping to have a conversation where you actually find out something that's really useful for you. They're working on a project that actually in some way ties to something you're doing. So those sort of norms are changed in this environment. And also we now, I suppose, because team meetings are happening in an online mode, we also have the complexity of, people, whose connections will drop, people who ask a question but didn't realize they were on mute, and now the time has moved on. They wondered why nobody answered them, or they're not sure who's asking a question or who's speaking at the moment. So all of those norms add extra pressure and challenges for people in this environment. And I think it just goes to show that how, the tools that you need to work in a remote environment now become hugely important. So let's move on then to time management. Another one where it can be, difficult at the moment, I think, for people to have, the same volume of productive hours during the day. If you're in an environment where there's children at home, they're just, it isn't possible to sit for 4 hours straight and be fully productive. So I think we need to be open to the fact that people will need to maybe to start early, finish early, start late, finish late, or those who may need to take an hour off in the afternoon just to maybe get children out for a walk, because that environment now needs to be both. It needs, you need to be able to look after those that are in the home, as well as tackle the actually workload that you may have. From a productivity point of view, I mean, there are just lots of studies out there, I think, and for every study where that says productivity goes up when people work from home, there's another study that says productivity goes down. In my experience, I think what we tend to see, and it's reflected in a lot of the studies, is that if people have asked to work from home, then typically it's for a reason where maybe it's for a family reason, or there's some other reason in terms of why working from home. Maybe it's to cut down on a very long commute time. And typically in those scenarios where somebody has looked to work from home, we tend to find that productivity goes up, or at least is maintained the same way as it would be if they were in an office environment. Um, Quite often you may actually find that where, working from home is just a benefit that anybody can avail of, you will certainly you can find the productivity can go down. And that can also not necessarily be driven by the fact that somebody doesn't necessarily spend as much time working, but the fact that they may be missing out on the connectivity with other people in the work group or in the team may actually mean that it's delayed time to get certain things done because they're waiting on somebody and they weren't able to contact them. Whereas typically if you're in an office environment, it tends to, you know how you have easier access to your teammates or to your manager. Distractions almost speaks for itself. I think in a regular working from home environment, you certainly get them. I've seen them. I've experienced them. There's always those things where the bins have been collected, the rubbish bins have been collected, and you go out to bring them in, and you bump into your next door neighbor on the way back, and it starts a conversation, and you're saying to yourself, "Oh, I really need to get back in, and how do I get away from this without being rude?" Right now, there are a multitude of other distractions that people are actually dealing with. And I suppose really the office versus the kitchen table, or the home office with maybe 3 children under 8 running around, are two very different scenarios for people. And I think that anyone who's currently working from home with young children is faced with everything from, the request for a drink, breaking up the squabbles that happen, and then needing to go and investigate when suddenly everything goes quiet. And I reckon that many of you who are on this webinar actually have experienced that over the last couple of weeks. And it's just normal, it's just natural. Those things are going to happen. Teamwork is one of the most difficult things to manage when a team works remotely. I suppose we all know that in that work environment, we very much it takes time to build a cohesive team and a team that really gels. Um, and it can actually take months. And suddenly to find ourselves dispersed, um, all working remotely, it does have the ability of breaking up that team in some respects. So I think what we end up with is, you've created a team where, they've got this combined routine, psychological safety, that sense of each person knowing each other, their strengths, their weaknesses, who I could reach out to for help, who, needs to be approached in a certain way. That is, a huge valuable currency when you've got a really good, strong, functioning team. And the last thing you want to do is to lose that once everything moves remotely. And unfortunately, it is one of the hardest things to, at one level, to manage. We're going to cover actually some ways of actually managing that, but it is something that you need to be very cognizant of, because once people disperse, and I suppose given the time of year that this whole situation has arisen, for a lot of organizations, new projects start at the start of the year. New people maybe come into an existing team, or whole new teams are formed, in January. So you may have a scenario where the team was just starting to get together, just starting to beginning to sort of find their feet, and suddenly everybody is dispersed. So we'll take a look at that, because it's important that we figure out what are the best ways to actually manage that team once we're all working in this remote environment. So let's move on and take a look at some ways to effectively lead remote teams. So actually, just before I go on, as with the previous slide, this slide has a number of areas that have an asterisk associated with the words on the slide. And that is just to let you know that we run ICT SkillNet, run an MSc with Technological University Dublin, which is the Masters in Leadership, Innovation and Technology. And all of the areas marked with an asterisk are actually covered as part of modules on that program. So that's the reason for the asterisk. And apologies, I forgot to mention it on the previous slide. So let's take a look. So the first thing is technology. So to effectively lead a remote team, you have to have the technology. So you need to be able to ensure that your team is fully connected. You need to ensure that they have access to all of the technologies that they would have access to in a work environment. So their email, network drives in the office, they need to be able to get at their data, VPN so they can securely log into your network, video conferencing, which we will certainly cover as we go through this, another important one. So they're just some examples. So whatever I use as a tool or a technology within the office space, I really need to be able to replicate that in my home environment to a great degree. Now, there may be just some things that it's just not possible for people to have access to, but in the main, they really need to have all the technology that they need. Clarity in terms of leading that team is really important. Um, when our face-to-face time with people is reduced, clarity becomes really important. And I would say that you really need to be so explicit what you want done, when it needs to be done for, how it needs to be done, with whom. And I would encourage the team to ask questions. I think it's very reasonable to have an initial call with the team and say, look, when we're not all in the office, there may be things that slip through the cracks. Somebody will miss the fact that something was published on a web page and they haven't seen it. So I think it kind of bodes on us as leaders to make sure that we almost over communicate in these scenarios and really be very explicit about what's needed and how things need to be done and when. Because again, the team are split. And I think we all know those scenarios that we've been in an office environment where we've gone to a meeting and somebody says, oh, we use the updated process for that. and everybody sits there and says nothing, and I'm sitting there going, I wonder where that updated process was posted, and I wonder when that came out, and I wonder, is that the one that was last week or the week before? Was it last week, the week before? But at least when we walk out of the meeting room, if we never ask, if we walk out of that meeting room, we'll usually stop somebody on the way out and say, where's the updated process? That is kind of gone in this new environment. So small things like that mean that we just need to be just more cognizant of how we communicate, and the fact that we're asking people if they understand, if they're following us. So communication itself, and again here I would err on the side of over communication. Um, whether you're communicating in through meetings, video conference meetings, through phone conferences, whether it's written materials that are going out, be as explicit and communicate as much as you can. Tell people what's going on, tell them where the organization is at the moment, tell them how we're responding in our organization to the current situation. So keep people informed and keep people updated, because they do become very disconnected. Video, love it or hate it, it is essential. And I'm not a lover of video, but after a while you just get used to it. You forget that you're on video and people can see you, and maybe you haven't put the makeup on this morning, but effectively, video means that you get so much better feedback from meetings that you hold with your team. So instead of sort of trying to just listen to the tone and listen to what people are saying, you actually can see the facial expression. So you get a much better sense of where the team is at and how people are getting on. One-to-ones, there's always this tendency that, when we go remote like this, that we stop the one-to-ones. It's actually now more important than ever to continue doing one-to-ones with each individual in the team. And I would suggest that you take maybe a 10 minutes in that one-to-one to just find out how they're getting on. How are they coping with this scenario? What's stressing them out? Are there things that we could do better as an organization or better as a team that would help them to keep engaged? So ask them what it is. That have they any ideas? Are there things that we need to be doing? Those one-to-ones very much just, tell the individual that you're still thinking about them as an individual, not just the team and not just the project and not just getting things done. So if you do need to move them, if you do need to, if one of them is on at a time and you have another clashing meeting that's related to what's going on in the environment at the moment, then reschedule it rather than cancelling it. I would avoid cancelling one-to-ones with people at the moment. It's even more important, I think, to stay connected, especially where people are maybe feeling quite isolated. So connection is two things. It's both your connection to the individuals in your team and their connections to each other. So in this one, what we're saying is to make sure that you are maintaining connectivity with your team, but also to encourage them to maintain connectivity with each other. So if there are sub teams, like, so if you've got a development team and a test team or something, or you've got a sales team and a marketing team, encourage them to meet in their own groups as they would do if they were physically in the office. And if you've got that video technology, they should be well able to host those meetings themselves. So they don't need you at every one, but you really want them to continue almost that business as usual, and not let the fact that they're all working remotely be a barrier to them engaging as a team. So coffee break is something that we've started to do in Technology Ireland ICT SkillNet. We started a few weeks ago once we all were out of the office. And I have to say I was a little bit dubious for the first one. I was thinking to myself, how will this thing work? And I suppose being new to the team too, I didn't know everybody very well. But so on a Friday morning for half an hour, we host a Zoom conference meeting. Everybody has their video on, and we all come with our cup of coffee or a cup of tea, and we literally talk about nothing to do with work. It's very much about just keeping those social connections, those kind of team sense of belonging to, together, and we're all in this together. So we talk about sort of how we're struggling with getting out and going to the supermarket and shopping for parents, and what we're watching on Netflix and what books we're reading. So it's purely a half hour social time. Now, for me, this actually meant a huge amount, as it turned out. We're completely used to it now because we're 3 weeks into it. But I had just joined the team, and I kind of thought about it afterwards, and I was saying, you know what, actually, this is kind of good for me, because otherwise, I think once we'd get back to the office and being face to face again, I think I would have felt very much like the newbie arriving on the scene, and I mightn't necessarily have meetings with everybody in the team every week. I mean, it would just depend on what we were working on. So for me, it's a great way of actually feeling like I'm part of the team. So really good idea. It actually works. Take it from me, definitely worth investing a half an hour with your team to do that during the week. So look, innovation doesn't need to stop once we all start to work remotely. There are lots of tools that will support whiteboarding, ideation, design thinking. So whether you're reinventing a business process, planning an event, a new product, a marketing plan, it's a great way to pull your whole team together and to do something that quite often teams like to do. It's a group activity. It's a little bit outside of the day job. They get to come up with ideas. So keep that engagement going and keep that teaming going by actually trying out some of these things while you are distributed. So career development really shouldn't end just because of the current situation that we find ourselves in. So we'll all have people in our teams who maybe are up for promotion this year, maybe people who've moved into new roles and have learning to do, or people who are trying to move to a new role. So, I know there will be certain things you won't be able to do. Maybe at the moment, some organizations will be struggling just to stay alive. And the last thing they maybe really feel they have time to be focusing on is things like career development. But I think it's worth, as part of those one-to-one sessions, to at least have the conversations. Lots of people will have time on their hands right now. So they may actually, with a bit of guidance from you, might actually start to do an online training program, that will help them towards that promotion or help them towards that change of career. So definitely worthwhile to keep that going. And the final thing is to be available. We very much, as managers, need to be seen, and we need the teams to feel that we're still connected to them. And I think what typically happens in an office environment is, if you're in, people will swing by in your office and ask you a question or whatever, but they know you're there if they need you. In this remote environment, what I've kind of found is that a lot of the technologies that we use to communicate, even in an office environment, can tend to be things like Slack, or it can tend to be, I send somebody an email to ask them something. So I think when people move to this remote space, it may even be a little bit harder for them. They may just sort of feel, well, actually, like, my manager is now at home and there's 2 children as well. Like, I don't think I'm going to ring her or ring him. So I think set up a time, maybe every day or every second day, where you set out a time that you're always available for people to contact you. And if you do that, they can contact you using, maybe a Slack or Microsoft Teams, whatever tools or technologies you're using, that they don't necessarily need to book the time slot with you, but that they know that they can catch you between those times. So let's move on and take a look at some of the tools that are there to help you through this. So there are a number of video conferencing tools. There are many more. I think I just picked the ones that tend to come up fairly high in some of the reviews that are out there. And these, I've just ordered them all in alphabetical order. Collaboration tools. So if you need your team to collaborate, Asana, Jira is specifically for software development, Microsoft Office 365, Slack, and Trello. And then there are the ones for ideation and for design thinking and for whiteboarding. So ideation is Confluence and Pro Workflow, and design thinking being InVision and Sprintbase. So they're some of the tools that certainly should help you out. Some additional resources that we put in there are the resources for managers around so just some papers. They're, again, not heavy duty. And as I mentioned earlier, the MSc in Leadership, Innovation and Technology covers a lot of the areas that I covered as part of the modules of the program, as I covered through the session today. So I'm just going to, let me move on, and we'll take some questions that have come in through the session. Okay, so the first one is, how can employees pace themselves? Some may be considerably more productive and fall into the habit of working longer and later, perhaps to make up for distractions. Okay, so Anthony's raised that one. Really interesting question, actually, Anthony, because I think that's what happens when those boundaries are actually split. Suddenly, the home environment is the home environment, and effectively now you're actually in that workspace. I think it's worth talking to people regularly and just checking in that they are not overdoing it in terms of the hours that they're actually working, that they are getting the downtimes and the rest times. And I think at the moment there can be that sense of, well, because I'm at home all day and there really is nothing else to do, I may as well still continue to work. So I do think that it's important for us as leaders to sort of say, look, it's just about get the job done, but take some relaxation time, even if the only thing they can do is get out and walk for their 2 kilometers, or they read a book or something. But I think it's about checking in, because we definitely will have people that just will feel guilty because they took 2 hours off in the afternoon and suddenly find they're doing 4 hours at night time once kids are gone to bed. So I think it's up to us to actually make sure that we check in with people and make sure that they're not overdoing it. Do you have any tips on treating employees consistently? One issue can be perceptions that some employees are given more leeway than others. Okay, gosh. Okay, Claire. Yeah, I think a lot of that, I think, comes down to how we actually manage the, what does productivity look like for us as an organization? I think we need to understand what people have to deliver and whether people are delivering. And if they're not delivering, are there issues with them delivering? But I think the only way to sort of treat people fairly is to kind of understand what people have to deliver within that work environment, and to very much, be aware that we really have to treat people consistently. And I know we don't always do that. And I think it's even more difficult in this environment where you can't see people. And I think that, and others may, I think often what happens too is that others don't understand that some people have actually a lot of other work that they don't actually know about. So definitely one to watch. I said something from David. In addition to virtual coffee breaks, it may be worth scheduling virtual beers, social sessions at the end of the week. Oh yeah, I'm all for that one, David. Optional attendance, but a chance for people to catch up. Yeah, which actually, could work very well. I'm hearing of lots of people using technologies like House Party and probably Zoom and FaceTime and other things to kind of carry on their social life. So it may be another way actually of including people and making sure that they're fully connected. Do we need to raise the frequency of project meetings in these conditions? Example, once a week to once a day. Actually, good question, because I know I didn't actually answer that as part of mine. But yes, I think that, if you only ever had in the work environment had a session once a week, a team session once a week, I think it really is important to maybe have shorter check-ins more regularly. A week is definitely a long time, and I think with a disconnected team where you're not bumping into them in the workplace and, kind of getting a sense that things are moving along, I think it's really important to do that. I would also encourage, that the teams themselves also do those kind of little mini check-ins themselves every day. So, if the teams naturally gather while somebody shows, a draft of the latest, materials for a marketing plan, maybe their graphics for it. And if people kind of gather around and look at that, then there's no reason not to continue to do things like that, and to for the teams themselves to pull themselves together separate to you. But I think from a manager point of view, yes, I certainly would be doing more. Amazingly, we're going to have to accept online workspaces. How do we, as managers, get people to buy into this whole idea? Yes, yeah. So I think it'll take a little bit of time. I think it's easier for those of us who've had working from home policies and we're used to some of the tools and technologies. But I think it's time, and I think right now we're going to have time. I think when people see that it works. But I do think that there's a lot of pressure on a manager to actually make the whole setting work. In terms of, I suppose you really do end up needing to lead by example. You're going to, for the first couple of weeks, probably have to drive the fact that we need to have team meetings. You're going to have to drive the fact of having one-to-ones. And I think to sort of demo the technology, like make sure you use the video conferencing, make sure that somebody, that you kind of walk through the what facilities are in it, so that for the main features of the technology, that people don't feel, oh, I don't know how to use that, so I'm not going to use it for mine, I'll just use the phone. I mean, ideally to just work through, do a little bit of training in the tools, or get them to do the online videos for some of the tools that you might want to use. And I think they will accept it over time. I think the other issue we may have at the other end of it is that organizations who've never had people work from home are going to suddenly find that people want to work from home. And that's going to be an even different scenario for people to get into. Oh, I just have one before I go. So any tips on balancing the calls with the actual work? I think as a manager, I would set out specific times in the day. Make sure your calendar is up to date. And I would set out specific times during the day that you say to people, look, I'm available. I'll be available to you between 9:30 and 10:30 in the morning, or between 4 and 5 in the afternoon. Pick a couple of times so that you actually manage to get some work done. But I would say, be aware, for the first few weeks of this, you may find it actually a little bit more difficult to get your own work done, almost, because I think the big goal at the start of all of this is to very much get the team together and make sure that the team are actually working together, and that they're actually connected and happy. Okay, that was the questions, and thank you so much for all of the questions that people asked. So I did mention at the top of this session that this is the first of a series of upcoming webinars. So we would be delighted if you can join us again next week. So each of them are happening on a Thursday at 2 p.m. So the next one is the 9th, and it's the Future of Talent Acquisition with Linda Davis. So I really hope that you found the webinar today worthwhile, that you've enjoyed it. I really want to thank you for the time that you've taken out of your schedule to join us today. I know it's not the same as being able to meet people face to face, but look, I guess it kind of proves that you can do some of these things while everybody is working remotely. I would ask that you would maybe pass on the details to your colleagues, anyone that you feel will be interested or benefit from joining one of the next sessions. And you'll find all of the details about the upcoming webinars there on our website, which is www.ictskillnet.ie. Please, everybody, stay well, and thank you again for joining us. And we hope that you will join us again next Thursday at 2:00. And with that, I'm actually going to close down the webinar. So thank you very much, everyone.